Sveiki, this is Easy Lithuanian video series, a simple way to learn Lithuanian grammar, and today we'll learn about the reflexive verbs. So what are the reflexive verbs? Well, they are normal verbs which have a particle added to them, which has the letter S inside it. It can be only S or S, S and Y, S and I. So the normal verbs can have an object. For example, prausti. Aš prausiu šunį. I'm washing my dog. And praustis, which is a reflexive verb, praustis, means I'm washing oneself, to wash oneself. So it means to have a bath or to have a shower. And you see, the normal verb has an object. For example, I'm washing a dog. And praustis means you don't have to, there's no object for this verb. You're only washing yourself. So this is a reflexive verb, and it has a little bit a different meaning. The verb is used differently. Next example, mokyti, to teach. Aš mokau lietuvių kalbos. I'm teaching Lithuanian language, for example. Or aš mokau jus. I'm teaching you. And mokytis means to teach oneself. For example, to teach yourself. Aš mokausi, I'm learning. I'm teaching oneself literally, but this means to learn. So the action is directed towards the doer. Aš mokausi, I'm learning. And aš mokau, I'm teaching. So we see that the difference is that the action is directed towards the speaker. Tikėti, to believe, and tikėtis, to hope for. Aš tikiuosi, I'm hoping that. And aš tikiu, I believe in. Aš tikiu vaiduokliais, I believe in ghosts. Aš tikiu ateiviais, I believe in aliens. And aš tikiuosi išmokti lietuvių kalbos. I hope to learn Lithuanian language. You see, the verbs, the meanings of the verbs can be quite different. These are quite simple to understand, to teach, and to teach oneself or to learn, to wash someone, and to wash oneself. And this is a little bit different, to believe and to hope for. So if you see the Lithuanian vocabulary series on my channel, you can see that when I'm teaching you some roots, there are prefixed verbs and there are reflexive verbs, and the meanings can be quite different. So how to remember the reflexive verbs? They can not only mean that the action is directed towards the speaker. For example, I'm doing something oneself. They can have other meanings. So let's see what those meanings and what examples there are. Well, first of all, it's not only I do something for myself. It also means reciprocity, that two people are doing the same thing, or doing the same action, or they are involved in one action, I could say. For example, bučiuoti, to kiss somebody, barti, to reprimand somebody, or to lecture somebody, to moralize. And so these verbs have some objects, somebody, and when they are turned into reflexive verbs, they don't have an object. The objects are themselves, the doers of those actions. There can be two doers of those actions, or three or more. So, bučiuotis means to kiss, bartis to have an argument. So, for example, jie bučiuojasi, they are kissing each other. You understand it. They are kissing. Jie bučiuojasi. You don't need to add anything else to that sentence. Bartis, jie barasi. They are having an argument, or they are arguing. The action is done by more people. The action is reciprocal. Both or more people are doing the same action, and that the action happens because there are two people doing the same thing, for example. So you can remember some verbs, bučiuotis, bartis, Kalbėtis, to have a conversation. Kalbėti means to talk, and kalbėtis, to have a conversation or to chat with each other. So jie kalbasi, they are talking to each other, they're having a conversation. The action is reciprocal, they are doing the same thing. There are two doers of the action. And you can remember such new vocabulary, new verbs. If there is such a reciprocal action, you can remember this way. That the se is not just, well, it's a verb, you have to learn. You just know that this is a reciprocal action, and you associate it in your mind better, so you'll learn verbs faster. Now, reflexive verbs can also indicate that there is some movement associated with the action. For example, slėpti means to hide, and kelti means to lift something or somebody. And slėptis means to hide. Keltis means to be lifted. Movement happens. For example, aš paslėpiau knygą, I've hidden the book. Or aš pakėliau knygą, I've lifted the book, I've taken the book. But if you use the reflexive verb, aš slėpiuosi, I'm hiding. Or jis slepiasi, he is hiding. Or jis keliasi liftu, he is being lifted by an elevator, he's using an elevator. So sometimes the reflexive particle can give, well, you cannot be sure what meaning it gives, but sometimes it can give the meaning of a movement. Slėptis means to hide, and keltis means to be lifted. There is movement happening. Kelti means you give the movement for something, and keltis means the movement is happening to you. No, those meanings are slightly different. So again, there are no objects for these reflexive verbs. You cannot use any objects with those kind of verbs. But this is similar to the reflexive verbs that describe changing states. Slėptis, to hide something and to hide oneself. So now, changing state. Žeminti means to humiliate somebody, kankinti, to torture somebody. And žemintis, to humble oneself, or kankintis, to be in torment or to suffer. To suffer. It's it doesn't mean to torture oneself. It could mean, but not always. Mostly it means to suffer. So you see, the action is not self-directed here most of the time. You can say, well, praustis, to wash somebody, and to wash oneself. This means this means I'm torturing myself. Kankinuosi. Kankintis, to torture oneself. Well, not. This means to suffer. The action, the state is changing here. The action is not directed to oneself. Kankinti means to torture, and kankintis means to suffer from others. It cannot only mean to torture oneself. It can mean to suffer. So be careful about those reflexive verbs when you're trying to guess the meanings, because they can be quite different, and not only the most logical ones. They may not be so logical. So kankintis, to suffer or to be in torment. Now, they can also describe quality. It's hard to explain, but there are some verbs like keikti, to curse or to swear somebody. Aš keikiu, for example, jis keikia politikus. He's cursing or swearing politicians. No, he's talking bad about politicians. Jis keikia politikus. But if you're saying keiktis, it doesn't mean to curse oneself. No, I'm cursing myself. Well, it could, but not always. But keiktis means to swear, to talk bad words, for example, the F words or something else. You're talking bad words. You're swearing. So it describes the quality of the verb also. Mušti, to beat somebody, something. And muštis, to fight. Again, it could be described as a reciprocal action. For example, two doers are doing the same action, two people are doing the same thing, or not only two, 3 or 4 or 5 people are beating each other, are fighting, you could say this is a reciprocal action. The doers are doing the same action. But no, but also you could say that this is the quality of the action. The action is a bit more, perhaps, intense. You know, kakti kaktis, mushti mushtis. The action is a little bit different here. So it's not necessarily directed towards each other. No, mushtis does not mean to beat oneself. It's not directed to yourself. I'm not beating myself, mušuosi. I'm fighting to each other. I'm fighting someone. I'm beating someone. So it's not that I beat myself, but this is to beat someone. Again, if you have the object, for example, jie mušasi, they are fighting, they are beating each other. You have a subject, you don't have to put an object. There's no object for this. But this way, the action is not self-directed, and those actions describe the quality of the action. You're worried about something, you're swearing, kaktis. You're beating someone, muštis. So those verbs can describe some quality. Well, it can be hard to understand, but you know, this category is not so clear. Well, I hope that those others will help you also. So now the reflexive particle can also mean indirect results. For example, prisikepti or užsilaukti. There is some result from the action. The action is laukti or prikepti, to bake a lot of something or to wait. And there is a result, užsilaukti. For example, aš užsilaukiau. I've been waiting for a long time. Aš užsilaukiau. Aš tavęs užsilaukiau. I've been waiting for you for a long time. That means, you know, there's a result. I've been waiting a lot. Or aš prisikepiau pyragų. I've baked myself a lot of cakes. Aš prisikepiau pyragų. You know, there are some kind of results. Those results are caused by the action. And the action is now reflexive. The verb is now reflexive. So when you have some indirect results that are resulted from the action, the verb can be reflexive. Prisikepti, to bake a lot of something for oneself. And užsilaukti, to be waiting for a long time. Again, not a very clear category, but it may help you. Now, intensity of action. Imti, to take, griebti, to grab, and imtis, griebtis, is a more intense action. No, imtis, griebtis, it's more intense. For example, aš ėmiausi užduoties, or aš ėmiausi darbo. I've taken up my work, or I started my work, my job. I've started my task. Aš ėmiausi. The action is more intense. And aš, well, imti does not mean to take up something, to take up work. But imtis is usually used with a task, with the work, with a job. This is also much more intense action than the simple to take action. Again, griebti means to grab something, and griebtis means to, for example, jis griebėsi smurto. He resorted to beating someone. He resorted to violence. Smurtas is violence. So jis griebėsi smurto. He resorted to violence. So these actions are much more intense, and it does not necessarily mean that if there is a reflexive verb, well, the action is directed to oneself, and the action means the same, that except that there's no object here. The action can be, the meaning of the reflexive verb can be quite different, you know. it means to take, and this is to take a task or a work or a job. This means to grab, and this means to grasp something quickly or to resort to something. The meaning can be different, but the action itself can be much more intense. So this should be quite easy to understand, this category of verbs. Now, there can also be some kind of intrinsical action. For example, keisti, to change something or somebody. And keistis means to change. It can also means to change oneself. Aš keičiuosi, I'm changing myself. Aš bandau pasikeisti, I'm trying to change myself. It can also mean that. But it can also mean keistis, jis keičiasi, he's changing. It does not necessarily mean that he's changing himself, but something else can also change him, and you'll also use the reflexive verb. So in this case, it can also be that the action can be caused by other things. You may not cause the action, but you can use the reflexive verb. For example, keiktis or muštis, keltis. You're not lifting yourself, an elevator is lifting you, but a movement is happening, and you use the reflexive verb. Keistis, you may not change yourself, someone else may change you, but intrinsical action happens, and you use the reflexive verb. So these are some categories which can show you what kind of different aspects reflexive particle can give the verbs. And if you didn't understand it well, it's not a problem, because the meanings can be slightly different or completely different. But I hope that this gave you some help, and when you learn new vocabulary, you will see whether it's reflexive because this action is reciprocal, or is reflexive because there is a movement happening, or you'll see a new verb, a new vocabulary word. You'll see, this is a reflexive verb. Perhaps it is describing quality. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is a reciprocal action, or the action is directed to the doer. This can describe quality. Or you'll see a new verb, it's a result. It's a result, so that's why there's a reflexive verb for this verb, for this word in English, for example. Or this is an intensive action, and that's why this is a reflexive verb. You'll notice that, and you'll learn those verbs easier. So I hope that it will make the learning of new vocabulary and new verbs, and there are many of those verbs. I hope this video will make the learning easier for you. And now let's take a look at the endings of reflexive verbs. If a reflexive verb has a prefix, you may know this from my vocabulary videos, or I had already told you in some other kind of video. If a verb has a prefix like ne, no, the negative prefix, or other kind of prefix like pa, no, su, pre, ush, and so on. If a verb has a prefix and it is a reflexive verb, you should put the reflexive particle between the prefix and the root of the verb. That's the crucial thing. If a verb has any prefix, the se should be between the prefix and the root, no matter what. So, but if the verb is non-prefixed, it doesn't have any prefix. Before adding se at the end of the verb, you need to modify some endings beforehand, before adding se. So those endings can be a little bit modified before adding the reflexive particle. And now let's see what kind of endings, which reflexive particles, whether s with the s and I or only s, are added to which persons and which tenses. And let's see what are the common things. So let's just overview this table, and let's at first see the common thing that is for all tenses and verb moods like imperative and subjunctive. Remember that when there is the first or second person plural, like we and you plural, you always have the ending me and te, which can be shortened in all tenses, me and te. But if the verb is reflexive, me and te always change to mes and tes, mes and tes. So whenever there's me and te, you change it to mes and tes. Doesn't matter what's before that. So I think that it should be clear for you. It's also for the subjunctive. Mes, me changes to memes, mete changes to metes, and te changes to tes. So it's always the case. Me and te change to mes and tes. Remember this. So this is easy. Now, for the first and second person singular, there are also some changes. If the ending is o, for example, aš dirbu, I'm working, aš dirbu. If the verb is reflexive, o changes to o. Well, in this with this verb, there's no reflexive verb for that. But whenever the verb ends in only o, you need to change the o to the diphthong o. O changes to o. And if the ending is I, for example, tu dirbi, you're working, it changes to I. So o changes to the diphthong o, and it changes to the diphthong I. And s are added, and particles s are added. So instead of saying o, you say osi, and instead of saying I, you say iesi. This is applied for the present tense, the a and I conjugations, when the second basic verb form has the ending a or I. So the first and second person singular change to osi and iesi. And this is also applied to the future tense, which is made from the infinitive, from the first basic verb form. Aš dirbsiu, I will be working, and of course dirbti doesn't have a reflexive version, but dirbsiu, o changes to uosi. So for example, praustis, to wash oneself. It means to have a bath or to have a shower. So praustis, you'll take off the t and you say prausiuosi, I will be having a bath or a shower, prausiuosi. But for example, if you will be washing a dog, it will be a normal verb. So aš prausiu, if the verb wasn't a reflexive one, you would only have the su, aš prausiu, and the reflexive is prausiuosi. So su changes to siuosi, and si, prausi, changes to prausiesi, si changes to siesi. Well, you could only say that o changes to osi and it changes to iesi. No, it does. The si doesn't change. The suffix of the future tense doesn't change at all. So whenever there's o or I in the first or the second person singular in any tense, either in future tense or in present tense, it changes to osi and iesi. When there's o and I in present or future tense, you change it to osi and iesi. That's it. And all those other, the second basic verb form, the third basic verb form have only aren't changed at all. You know, this is the same for he, she, they, and we. I'm sorry, he, she, and this is for they. The person, they. So those forms remain unchanged. The endings do not change for the basic verbs. For the second basic verb form and for the third basic verb form, you only add se. So you get procesi, or ilsisi is having a rest, or klausosi is listening. So procesi, were washing, was having a bath. Or norėjosi. Norėjosi. You don't change the I. I'm sorry, the ending if it's a basic verb form, the second or the third. And if it's the first basic verb form, this is the infinitive, you only add se. Se. So now we've covered three things. The first and second person plural for all tenses and moods, you only change me and te to mes and tes, and we've covered the first and second person singular. If it has an o or I ending in present or future tense, those endings change to osi and iesi. And the third thing that we've covered now are the basic verb forms. If it's a second or third basic verb form, he, she, they, you only add se, and if it's the first basic verb form, if it's the infinitive, you only add se. So these were the changing of the endings, and now the present tense, all conjugation doesn't change any endings except the first and second plural, and the past tense conjugations also don't have any alternations to their endings. So prausiausi, the O doesn't change. The first and second person singular only change when they end in O or I. O changes to osi and I to iesi. So present tense and past tense, we've covered this. Now the future tense, and let's start with this table. We've overviewed this, so let's see the future tense. So O and I change to osi, iesi, me, te to mes and tes, and the only question mark is on the third person. He, she, they will be doing something. So whenever you have the third person, you add is. You add I and se. I and se, so you get is. So the ending is sis. For example, he, she, they will be having a bath. Process. The normal future tense would only be pros, non-reflexive, and the reflexive would be process. So before the shortened reflexive particle, you should add I. And you should remember this thing about the future tense for reflexive verbs is that before the third person he, she, they reflexive particle, you should add I. So remember, sis. The endings for the third person are sis. Now, the past frequentative tense. doesn't have any changes except the first and second person plural. That's pretty easy. That was a mistake here in the past frequentative tense in this table. So if it's the past frequentative tense, you don't change anything except me and te. Sorry for the mistakes in the table. No changes occur in the past frequentative tense. Now, the subjunctive. No changes occur except the me and te change to mes and tes, whether it's a shortened one or not. The third person he, she, they also is normal with only se added, and those two other persons, first and second singular persons, are also only with the reflexive particle se added. So no changes occur in this. And the imperative, me and te, of course, changed to mes and tes, just like for all tenses and moods. But the imperative for you, singular, only has se. So the normal imperative would be prausk, wash something, wash a dog, and prauskas, have a bath. Imperative is prauskas. So prausk, prauskas. Just like with the future tense, k, there was only k, you add is, so you get kiss, and for the future tense, it only was se, so you add is and you get sis. So k, se changed to kiss, sis for the imperative and future tense. These are the two endings which have is. So these were all the tenses. Now, you're asking me why there are those brackets. Why are the brackets here? Well, actually, these endings can be shortened. Those singular endings for those first, second, and third person singular can be shortened, and for the third person plural also. So instead of saying se, you only say se. And of course, you cannot shorten this infinitive because there's nothing to shorten. It's already only se, and you cannot shorten infinitive and the plural persons. You only can shorten those persons which have se. So sometimes se is shortened to only se, but it's occurring more and more rarely. It is rare nowadays. I think it's getting more and more rare, and well, I don't think it is very crucial to know those endings now shortened. And of course, it is better that you learned those endings and you could make those verbs and you could conjugate those verbs, and then when you hear some verbs which are shortened, which have shortened reflexive particles, it will be nothing hard. But as I've said, they are shortened rarely, mostly in lyrics, in poetry, in literature, but people shorten those endings rarely nowadays. It's getting rarer. So that was it for this lesson. I hope it was useful. Remember the me, te, and mes, tes, o, e, and osi, iese thing. Remember the reflexive verbs and try to revise them. And good luck in your further studies.